Hello.
Starting in progress.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, sorry.
You
Start
got
again.
no. Everything goes in, Bill. Everything goes in.
That's it.
It's like jazz my videos. Yes, everything will go in. So
Very good.
I did like your little impersonation there of the little lady who says recording is now in progress, and you did it wonderfully. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, I have with us today, not only an absolute legend of drumming, but also one of my biggest influences, and possibly the drummer that opened the world of drumming and music up for me many, many decades ago when someone gave me a
Oh,
copy of the Yes album. And I don't know what it was about that album, but it seemed to open the doors to everything that's happened to me since. It's an honor to speak to you, Bill. And you said I must call you Bill. If anyone thinks I'm being disrespectful,
not at all, please. Yeah, we won't get very far if you call me Fred.
so it's wonderful to have you here. I've got a number of questions that I would like to ask you,
Oh, my word.
and they are going to cover, I would say, early days and latter days. So I,
Yeah.
I'm really not that aware of how you started out as a drummer. What sort of age were you when you started playing?
Some very easy, soft question to start with. Softball.
Yes.
I was about 12 or 13, I suppose. I came under the influence of an influential older sister, who was about 5 years older than me, I suppose. So she introduced me to Elvis Presley and rock and roll and all that stuff that we had. My parents were neither of them musical, but both very good ballroom dancers. And they were the generation that would roll up the sitting room rug and actually dance to records.
Mm.
And I could see the pleasure that that was giving them. Absolutely great. My mother was very rhythmic anyway. Great driver, great golfer, great dancer. And I was the disc jockey basically. So I would put on, Frank Sinatra and Cole Porter and stuff, all the classics, Great American Songbook, and enjoyed all that. And then one day, my sister's boyfriend gave her a pair of brushes, you know, drum brushes. Why? I don't know. Don't ask me why. But
Mm.
she said, "Here, can you?" He said, if you swish these around on a thick vinyl cardboard record sleeve, it'll sound great. And I did that for a bit, and then I progressed like you do to a pair of
Mm.
drumsticks and started watching Jazz 625, I think. You're probably too young for that. BBC show 625
No,
uh, prime time
I,
UK TV.
when I was a kid, they showed them again in the 1980s, and I
Yeah.
was a huge fan of yours. Um, your drumming, especially on the first Yes album, has influenced my approach to playing jazz drumming. I heard it was a six-stroke roll, the way you utilize that within jazz swing that I found very interesting. But also, my dad being a big jazz fan, he was taping a lot of those jazz 625.
Mm.
And there was one that I really loved, and it was Clark Terry and Bob Brookmeyer, and on drums was a drummer called Alan Ganley.
Yeah.
And I always
Terrific.
thought he sounds a little bit like Bill Bruford. There's an accuracy and a snap and a sort of snare drum tone. And so for many, since the 1980s, I've always wanted to know whether you saw that TV show or whether Alan Ganley was a drummer you were aware of.
He was a drummer I was aware of, sure, along with Ronnie Stevenson. Many of the
Yeah.
great London studio players were great jazz players, of course, and they were the best drummers. And the most famous of them, of course, was the guy with Jimi Hendrix. I'm going to give you his name again.
Mitch
Um,
Mitchell.
Mitch Mitchell, of course. He
Yeah.
was with the Riot Squad and also a studio player. So he was pretty good. What was the question? Um,
Well, it wasn't really, it was
it,
whether those drummers were an influence on
oh,
you.
yeah. Yes, they were. But funny enough, by then I'd sort of progressed to age of 14, 15. I'd left my sister behind and was with some older guys, excuse me, who were jazz freaks. And, we listened to the Beatles, we listened to the Rolling Stones, thought they were pretty good, not bad at all. But it wasn't as much action happening, we felt, as there was, with Art Blakey's
Mm.
Jazz Messengers, Freddie Hubbard and stuff like that, which sounded terrific to me. And so I came up through jazz really. Not being a rock snob or anything, I didn't mind rock at all. It just didn't seemed a bit duller, not much happening. apart from who who was the guy with an American hit, the Safari guy, um,
Oh,
drum. I can't remember. Never mind.
yeah.
There was the occasional drum hit record. But
Well,
I grew up through jazz basically.
that's very interesting. On Saturday, I had Soft Machine in my studio and they did a recording session. And
Wow.
I sat down with John Etheridge and he said, have you read Bill Bruford's book? And I said, I haven't read it, and I haven't read it. And he said, you must read it. He said, we goes, we're a similar age and we had a similar upbringing. He goes, we're both posh boys. And he said, and we both came in, and it was very interesting what he said on this sort of second wave of the incredible revolution that was happening in London in the 1960s. And so you'd had that earlier, very blues derived,
Yeah, yeah.
and a whole bunch
Mm,
of drummers that were around that. And then there's a second wave that come in. I think Mitch Mitchell you could put in there a little bit earlier, maybe John
yeah.
Heisman and
Mhm.
yourself. Eve. But what I find fascinating with you were, when did you get into that London scene? Because I'm very aware that you joined Savoy Brown, and that's often described. I'm thinking, well, how do you arrive in London? I mean, you're barely out of teenage,
Yeah,
and,
yeah. I was only 18 or so.
you're in Savoy Brown. So how did
Yeah,
that
yeah.
happen?
Well, I must have seen an ad somewhere, probably Melody Maker. I
Yeah,
think we mostly got ads out of Melody Maker, and it would have said something like, guitar band wants drummer sort of thing, auditioning in Brixton,
yeah,
I think it was. And I didn't have a car. I didn't drive at the time at all. I had to get a friend to drive me up, with drums. I thought I ought to take my drums. Probably these days, of course, as I'm sure it's all done on a rental set. But I
mm,
took my drums and played, and that didn't seem to go very well at all. And Savoy Brown's just a pretty straight ahead blues band,
yeah,
you know. But already I was thinking I ought to really change this music somehow and play it in a different meter, or play it quieter or louder or something. I ought to do something with it. This is, of course, signing my own death warrant if you're going to do it with a blues band. Um, and then uh, they settled for a guy, I think called David Earl, maybe he came later, but they settled for a guy. And I waited to the end of the audition, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this. This is very embarrassing. And can I whisper this? I told them they'd got the wrong guy. That
yeah,
why hadn't they taken me? I couldn't understand it. Sorry, I hate to be, an
yeah,
arrogant shit. Um, and they said, his name was Harry Simmons. He said, "Oh, all right then, you're in the band." So just like that. So the
yeah,
other guy didn't get it, and I did because I'm a pushy shit,
yeah.
horrible at age 18, I think. And so I only lasted 3 nights. 15 quid a night.
I had a rock encyclopedia that had a brief mention of your, when you're in the 1980s, we couldn't go on the internet, and it said, and I never knew whether this was apocryphal or not, that you got sacked for playing 6/8 in a fashion that is not appreciated within the blues genre. Is that correct?
All that kind of thing. Yeah, I was fiddling about with the beat.
Yeah.
So at an early age, I don't know why, I somehow got it in my head that what I wanted to do was change things, mostly myself. But what I wanted to do was, and through music, I would change things through music. That's what a very vague adolescent idea of what that meant. But I was obviously a bit disruptive, so I didn't last very long with them.
I I for you I grew up, started playing drums in 1980. My dad was a jazz musician, not a great one, but he'd worked and he was into
Oh,
jazz.
wow.
His biggest gig ever was Basil Kirchin. He got in the Basil Kirchin Orchestra in the late 1950s and got the sack when they realised he couldn't read and he was busking it.
Oh dear.
But I got brought up on a diet of jazz, but I sort of discovered heavy metal and heavy rock, and I was into sort of the John Bonhams and Ian Pacey's of the world.
Yeah.
And then after swapping a copy of Silver Machine picture disc for the Yes album, and I heard you're playing, and it was like a light bulb going on because you were doing everything wrong as far as I could see. You weren't, your aesthetic choices were not what I thought we were supposed to do. So you didn't have that big sort of cannony bass drum and cannony snare drum, and
No.
everything was really light and precise. You were coming out of jazz. You were playing not just odd times, but not playing backbeat.
Yeah.
You know, and so now I've always wanted to talk to you about this because it had a profound effect on me, and I can remember.
Sorry, Andy, about
Uh,
that.
I know, and I could never get a gig after that. As soon as I then discovered 1916 and all this stuff,
Oh yeah, right.
yeah, and I was fascinated by it. But it was actually you that made me, and I also started to experiment with the sound of the drums. I was very influenced by. And we have met a couple of times at many years ago at Drumfest, and I remember asking you about that cymbal sound on Starless, which I'm not going to
Okay.
on red.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you about that today. But
Mm.
it was a fact that you were always pushing the envelope. You weren't trying to conform to what was there, but you were trying to bust it out from within. A very unsession musician sort of approach.
Yes, yeah, very unsession musician. But don't forget the ecology at the time was progressive rock. You know, we were supposed to be progressing, which I thought meant doing things differently tomorrow than you did them today. You know, broadly speaking. So I thought I was, of course, again, adolescently
Yeah.
misguided. I thought I was trying to progress a bit and bring new sounds and look at different ways of playing the drum set a little bit, if that were possible. Not that I knew how to play it anyway in the first place, but my
So,
heart and intentions were probably in the right place.
um, you say you couldn't play it. I can remember very quickly getting in the first Yes album, and I think it's on the track "I See You," and it's all you're doing some quite intense jazz sort of comping, and there's a lot going on. And I studied this quite a lot, and this was not in a context where I would have expected it. And I'd heard things like that from my dad's drummers, but it wasn't quite the same. I'm fascinating to know how someone who's like 20 years old or however you old you were when you recorded that, where that come from? Did you have lessons? Did you have a rudimental approach, or was it listening to records? What were your
Really listening to records. There wasn't a drum lesson to be had
really?
in Sevenoaks, Kent,
Yeah.
in 19, 66. There was a guy we hung out called Pete Skinner, who was really he's passed away now, but he was really nice, and he was an older man like Alan Ganley.
Yeah.
So I hung around with him a bit, and he'd probably say go ting ting to ting. So I grew up going ting ting to ting rather than ting ting bang ting ting bang ting ting bang.
Yeah.
I grew up with swung triplets, and listened to a lot of pretty out there jazz. So I was big Roy Haynes fan, Snap, Crackle, and Pop. Big Art Blakey, big Morello, big I suppose Roach. Around those guys, and I just copied as much as I could. But of course, we couldn't slow anything up, so
Yeah.
I ruined lots of records trying hard to figure out what it was that Tony Williams had just played. All but impossible. And I struggled through, same as I'm sure everybody in my generation did. I'm sure John Bonham did something similar. I'm sure, Ian Pace did
Mm.
something similar. But drum lessons, no. But eventually I fell into a drum book, which was something about coordinated independence. I've forgotten the name of the Jim
It's
Chapin's book.
Jim Chapin's
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
Yeah.
lovely book. And I still have that today. It's still got the same 1968 coffee stains on it. And I could play bits of that, and
And
I was getting better all the time.
how could you read it?
I knew notation at that point, and the school I was at had said, "Well, we haven't got any drum teachers here, but you could, if you like, talk to George Cooper over there, who's the brass musician." He said, "Well, I can't
Mm.
really. There's not much point in me teaching you harmony, but I can teach you what shall we do with the drum kit?
Mm.
Say, look, I can tell you what that
Mm.
sounds like.
Mm.
Can you hear me drumming? Can you
Not
hear
really.
that?
No,
Oh, okay.
the Zoom's cancelling it,
Okay, well, that's no good.
which is a shame because I would have had my own personal Bruford beat.
Yeah, you would have done. So I could read a
Yeah.
line of music and still can't read music enough to interpret it. I'm not a fast reader though.
No, that's very interesting. You do seem to come out of nowhere, and there's a lot of not just technique, as in a platonic technique. You had a ways of playing which you just no one seemed to be pulling from. Um,
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know why. I don't know why. I wasn't trying really to be. Well, I suppose I liked it if I did sound different.
yeah.
Often I'd try to copy somebody, and as soon as I was more or less unable to copy them, I thought, well, I'm close to copying it, but I don't really want it. Well, I don't want his thing.
Yeah.
So I'll take it down this direction and see what it sounds like if I play my right hand with my left and my left with my right, or something like that. And that would come up with a figure that I hadn't heard before. And that would go in the old brain box, I suppose. And, it turned out to be a way of doing things. I've been doing the same thing ever since.
Mm. And so, being the age you're at, and I would imagine Drums Unlimited must have been a hell of a album for you, the Max Roach album. Did you hear that?
No, or did I? Was it Drums Unlimited? It may have been. I'm thinking of things with I loved his track Self Portrait for Big Sid too, Sid Catlett's thing.
Yeah, that's Drums Unlimited. The one,
Is it? So it
yeah,
was Drums Unlimited.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
lovely. A lovely way of, and from that, I realized that you didn't have to be fast and furious. In fact, if you left a little space, people really liked that. It allows people to get into the music if there's a little space in it drumming. So obviously, when it got to heavy metal and stuff, and math metal and God knows
Mm,
what, and the bass drums are going,
mm.
that's not really me. I'm not going to be going down that road.
And what about when funk came in? Because I have a sort of a hobby horse I get on. I say all those early progressive rock drummers were so groovy and funky, and now it seems all as stiff as an old, But everyone had a swing, and you had a real heavy groove.
Well,
You
yeah,
and Chris Squire, if you just isolated that, was as heavy as Sly and the Family Stone or James Brown. So
yeah, sure. We had a thing, and it's all about having a thing with another
yeah.
guy. That's what collaborative creativity is, really. It's doing it with someone else. So yes, I was a keen fan of Sly Stone, of course. I thought it was terrific. And Andy Newmark, his stuff with the early drum machines there. Gregorico, of course, on drums. Yeah, I loved it. Loved it. In fact, do you remember the English critic, Chris Welch,
Yes, yes.
who wrote for the Melody Maker?
Yeah.
Chris and I became friends to a degree, and we'd hang around watching Ginger Baker, who was called Peter Baker then,
Mm.
and we'd hang around watching him for a bit. And I think I met Peter Ginger Baker through Chris Welch, and Chris said, he's playing the Boogaloo beat." I said, "What? He's playing the what?" "Boogaloo beats. He just imported it from America. We just heard it from America. Boom, to bang, boom, boom, bang, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bang, boom, boom, bang." And so there was kind of beats. Nobody yet used the word funk.
No.
Nobody, in fact, in the early days of Yes, I don't think anybody knew what funk was.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps, guys in the States were using the term among themselves, but it hadn't made it across the water to us yet. Funny, isn't it?
Oh, you're touching on a mystery I don't quite understand. I'm obsessed with what was going on in London in the 1960s. I've spoken to many musicians that were there at that time. It seems to be a tiny little circle, and everybody's in it, and they're all going to the same little clubs and seeing the same gigs. And you hear, my wife's father was a guy called Peter Wynn, and he was signed to Larry Parnes. He was signed up with Larry
Okay.
Parnes. So when he was signed, his band would have been, this is early 60s, it would have been Licorice Locking on bass, Big Jim Sullivan guitar, Clem Catini or Brian Bennett on drums, and who else? Georgie Fame on keyboards.
Right.
And then my mother-in-law, she was hanging around in the same scene, and she was best friends with Duffy Power. So she would bump into Ginger Baker, and
Yeah.
and they all start talking, and from them you start to see that there's this. It's just a matter of years where you go from sort of the shadows to the prog stuff and funk and groove, and I'm always thinking, where does this backbeat come in? Now Ringo plays the part, don't you think, in terms of the
Yeah.
way that sounds?
Sure. Sure. I don't think there's a moment, there's a
Yeah,
period of time in which psychedelic moved, to progressive rock, and
yeah,
progressive rock stole from everywhere it could. It was made up, a mishmash of all kinds of styles. What's this beat? Oh, it's a funk. People call it a funk beat. Let's try a bit of that. We'll put that in the middle of West Side Story or something, which is kind of what Yes was about. So everybody was open to everything. It felt like it was just a hugely creative time, really.
But you see, it's very strange to me because I grew up listening to the drummers that I sound like, because those are the drummers, people like you, and I try to play like you, and I sound like that. Whereas your generation would have started off listening to, say, DJ Fontana, who's basic swinging, and then you've got Art Blakey.
Yeah.
And I can remember I used to work with a lot of rappers, and I used to say, where
Oh.
do you get your drum beats from? And they go, prog, because it's the heaviest, funkiest, heavy and funky.
Yeah,
And you're the man. So did you suddenly realize, oh yeah, was it Ginger Baker? Was it the Boogaloo beat where you suddenly thought, oh yeah, this is cool? But then you take it and start to invert it almost straight away. By the time you get to 70,
yeah.
you're turning it upside down, and it's like,
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, where are you hearing evidence of that? In Close to the Edge, maybe by Yes at that point, or
yeah, well, even the
you
Yes
know,
album, there's obvious beats, obvious ways you would have taken it if, and of course, what I'm saying is if you'd have taken it the obvious way, but these beats would have only been around for 3 years. You
true,
see what I'm
true.
saying? And you get
Yeah,
so
it was a
was
very
it?
fast exchange of
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
and music was everywhere. And music was more important even than sport at the time.
yeah,
Musicians were the stars of the day. The Mick Jaggers were bigger than the Wayne Rooneys almost. Um, and there's a lot of exchange of music very quickly, a lot of absorption of it, and a lot of outlet of it. So everybody was saying, let's do something different. I can remember sitting with, I think, the Nice, or being in a van, and we just heard the Nice, I think, and all we wanted to do was be different from them. All we wanted to do was to be different. For God's sake, don't sound like Led Zeppelin. And not that they're fantastic, but we don't want to sound like
yeah.
that. Everybody will laugh at us.
Do you think was because the gig scene was so healthy as well? So you're
Yeah,
seeing a lot of gigs, and also you're seeing bands evolve. You don't have to wait for a record in London at that time, do you? You can go see
in,
Jethro Tull and go, oh my God,
absolutely.
new guitarist. Oh, they've changed. But what you're saying that's interesting is that people didn't want to copy. There was a feeling of not copying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very true. The exact antithesis today,
Yeah,
where a record company dominated business will look for an exact identical thing. So naturally, and that's the way that system works. Whereas we were free as a bird. Don't forget, we had 3 albums
yeah.
before we made any success, and you could have cut us off any time in 2 years, in the first 2 or 3 years of the band's history, and there wouldn't have been any Yes, which is of course what happened in those days. Well, happens now. Sorry.
And
In
so
those days, we
what
were
were
allowed
the
to continue.
Yeah, why did the labels do that? What were they just waiting for their investment to return? Did they have a feel that or did they just did not care about that, or were they happy with the profits that you were? What was it?
Why did they let us to continue
Yeah,
without
yeah,
booting us off the label? Well, it was getting pretty bad. I mean, first of all, we were running out of money.
yeah.
So somewhere after the third album, somewhere after the Yes album, I remember a sort of meeting where we were down to about 50 quid, and we needed someone to put some money in, and somebody put in
Mm,
the enormous sum of like £500, which
mm.
would get us to the end of the following week.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of the bands were losing money on the road. So I remember the Who were going out for some huge sum of £300 or something like that, but it was costing them £400 or £500 to do the gig, which it was also in Yes's case. So everybody was losing money,
Yeah, yeah.
but we were
Oh,
all banking on this kind of hit record. And I remember they said, Atlantic Records, we were just starting Close to the Edge, and they sent down one of their star producers. Now I'm thinking, give me an Atlantic Records star producer of the 60s or 70s. I can't
I
remember his
know.
name.
I know the engineers. I
No,
mean, not
no,
the
no,
no.
not Arif Mardin. It was somebody like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, he came down to where we were just starting Close to the Edge, and he hung around for a day and said, "Well, I think I'll go back to America now. You guys obviously are on your own here. You're in a world of your own. You know what you're talking about within yourselves. It's a kind of music I don't know," he
Mm.
said, and so I'll catch you later, kind of thing. But they let us do it, which was great.
There must have been a very strong sense of something bigger than success for you to think, oh, we might get chucked off the label. Let's write something like In the Heart of the Sunrise, and that will do it.
That'll get us chucked off the
Yeah,
label.
yeah.
Yeah, we were just making the music we wanted, but you see, there was a confluence of events which was wonderful. You know, the music ecology was just sort of we were sailing in favorable winds. So there's 24 track stereo was being invented, you know,
Yeah,
the great American FM radio system, which
yeah.
allowed, you know, and permitted long forms, long tracks, and so
Mm,
forth. All that was coming on board, and progressive rock was just absolutely tailor made for all that. It was faintly countercultural too, which kind of helped. So it wasn't all
mm.
prim and proper pop as America had had. So you know, we were the right kind of band in the right kind of place at the right kind of time.
I've always got a little bit miffed by the idea that punk came along and sort of made prog go away because I feel when you listen to the albums that these musicians who wanted to change by 1973, and I think close to the edge is the watershed of this, a certain group of musicians went, right, this is done now. We've got to go somewhere else. And I feel that you may be one of those musicians that was looking for an out earlier on after.
Uh,
Does that make sense to you?
a little bit. I was going to refer you to Robert Fripp, who was the first
Yeah,
guy I thought said stuff about you know, dinosaurs, sounding like
yeah,
dinosaurs, and you know, we
yeah,
need to stop because this is becoming repetitive, etc., etc. And so broke up the band that I'd left Yes to join, King Crimson.
yeah.
So I think I was just looking for more excitement. I'd only been with four guys my
Mm,
whole career, which was a
yeah,
pathetic career of about 4 or 5 years. I'd seen the same rear ends in front of me, you
mm,
know,
mm,
for about 5 years, 4 years perhaps, and I was looking for a change. I needed to play with other people badly, I think, you know, just to get experience, of course.
mm,
So I went to King Crimson, and Robert then more or less broke it up and decided that progressive rock had sort of it was beginning to eat its own entrails, which some would agree with, I think.
mm,
And off he went to New York, and I can't remember what I did. I sort of became a session musician for a while
mm.
and tried to figure out how I might be able to get from where I was to making my own albums, which was a bit of a stretch. You know, I wasn't sure I was going to be much of a writer of music, although that came later.
Yeah.
So forth.
Yes, that's a very interesting thing because I can, when I got Fragile, and you have a very short little uh it's a very short little composition, which being a drummer, I know is built around what sounds like a linear drum part,
Cheers.
which is very interesting because I cannot think of anyone else doing linear drumming in 1972.
Probably got
This
that
is
from probably got that from Gary Baldy,
Was he
David Gary
around
Baldy.
then? Was he really
Well,
doing?
well, I remember seeing them in Long Island in 1973, and they
But
were terrific, absolutely terrific.
you did that before 73.
Oh, well, maybe I did, yeah.
I've
I
said
don't
to a
know,
number.
you
See,
know.
it's interesting. I've gone around and said Bill Bruford invented linear drumming. I've never heard anybody do anything. Maybe you could say that Zigaboo from the Meters.
Yeah,
Were
I didn't
you?
know him.
You didn't know them,
I
so
didn't know
no,
that, no.
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 But by the mid 70s, you're a composer. How did that happen?
Slowly, very slowly. I always had a piano at home. I always liked the sound of a piano a lot. You know, I had a few instruction books, and I knew my 60 jazz chords, and I knew what a minor seventh did, and why you had a major seventh, so on and so forth. But for drummers, you know, it's piano being a percussion instrument, which it is in many ways. You only got to bang two notes up and down and go
Mm,
boom da 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 boom da da boom da da boom da da, and you've got a bass drum and a snare drum.
mm,
You're already, you know, you're already writing music. Then change a few of those notes, and you've gone off to another part of the tune. It's not insuperably difficult. So I got to work in that, and also there was asked Rick Wakeman a few tricks and tips. Rick was very accomplished because
mm.
he was knowledge based. You know, he'd been to college, so he had some golden arrangement tricks were really lovely. So I stole a couple of those.
He's like a bit like a John Paul Jones in Led Zeppelin, isn't he? People don't appreciate how what an arranger he is. As soon as he joins
Yeah,
I mean, you think of the Bowie stuff as well. The way
Yes,
you could tell he comes in and suddenly.
yes. And you'd say, Rick, we've got this great song here, and it goes up to here and it's really good. But then it meets this other bit here, which we'd also like to use, but they don't go together. And he'd say, "Oh, just give me, go and have a coffee and give me 10 minutes, and he'd do a wonderful kind of join together, a cement job where you couldn't see, the way the music had been manipulated to join together. It was really lovely. And you say, well, if you play this in 3/8 and you play it backwards, 3/4 or something, you play it backwards and change the key, everything will be fine. And so we'd do that, and hey presto, everything was fine. You know, that happened quite a bit. Yeah, he
you,
was very good.
you do you do become a drummer for hire, and it lasts there's quite a while. And there's a couple of sessions I want to ask you about because I'm determined to ask you questions about stuff that no one else is going to ask about. So
All right.
those three sessions that I like very much that I want
Oh
to ask you
God,
about, and
I'm not going to remember any stories on this, but go ahead.
well, I know it might be also approaches that might be interesting. One of them is the album you did with Jamaluddin
Oh,
Takuma.
Takuma, yeah.
That because that you around that period you were cropping up on albums. I was like, whoa, Bill Bruford's on that, and of course the whole Audit Coleman melodic approach to
Yes,
improvisation. So what
sure.
was that something that you were interested in? Was it? Did you learn anything from
I
going
I
into that?
I learnt lots in the sense that you learn every time you sit down at a
Yeah.
drum kit. And I learnt not to do things in a rush, really. That whole thing was done in a rush. I was on the way from upstate New York to JFK, and I had to stop in at the studio and do
Mm,
that particular session on
mm.
a studio rental drum kit, of
Ah,
course.
yeah.
And they were playing the music to me as I was adjusting the drums, and then it was really 1, 2, 3, 4, let's go sort of thing. And what I learned was I'm not very good at that. It's not my preferred way of operating, although I like to feel I can not collapse completely.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and I recommend it to all young drummers is that, I think once or twice a year, every musician should be completely certain that he is out of his depth
I
and,
agree.
and has no idea what to play in this given circumstance. Twice a year, maybe. And boy, you learn fast that way.
I
It's
I interviewed Calvin Weston, who got the gig with Ornette Coleman at a very young age, and he said he went down and sort of did this bit of a swing ride sort of thing, and Ornette
yeah.
hated it and sent him home. And he said, "You've got to come back with something else. This isn't correct." And he said he went home and he thought, "Well, this is weird. The Mahavishnu Orchestra is weird." And so he got the set list and he thought, I will do the drum beat from Birds of Fire on that one. And I will do.
Wow.
And he said he went back the next day and played Mahavishnu beats. And Ornette loved it. And he had the gig, So
Yeah,
I wonder whether there was a little
yeah.
bit of that on that session. A
I like
very,
that. Absolutely. I like broad brush thinking too. The Bill Bruford first response to this isn't going to work. So
yeah.
now I'll copy somebody else's thing and play it backwards. I like that. I
Yeah.
think that's terrific. It's emergency thinking.
And it's good to throw a spanner in the works, isn't it? Sometimes when you don't know what to do, throw a spanner in the works and see what happens.
Sure, what's the worst that can happen? Nobody dies.
No, exactly. And has that always been your approach going into groups to how much is it your vision and how much is how do you approach going into a band and doing not just playing in that band, but there's so much you've done, which I would say, well, these are new ideas. I'll give you another session that I absolutely love by you is the Cloud About Mercury session.
Yeah, that came
Um,
off well, I think. I
the,
really, really enjoyed that. There's a track on that. David Torn, the guitar player,
yeah,
David Torn, very,
yeah,
very well-known guy. Um, called in typical David language, 3 minutes of pure entertainment.
yeah,
And it is of course 7 minutes of the most abstruse music you could possibly want to hear.
yeah.
That's very David, of course. But there's a groove in that that's terrific, I think, absolutely with me and Tony Levin. And it was an ECM album. And if you know about ECM Records, it's run by the rather intimidating Manfred Eicher, who was sits in a control booth like this with his head in his hands, listening as you're playing back. And I think I was the first electronic drum set that he'd come across.
Mm,
And he came out and kind of sniffed around a bit and tapped it and wondered what it did.
yeah.
and then walked away. He didn't seem unhappy about anything, just permanently very down like this. And the record came about. How did I meet David? I don't even remember that. Well, I did two records for him, and Tony Levin and I were the kind of King Crimson rhythm section, the band having stopped a few years earlier
Mm.
or a year or two earlier, and we were on a bit of a roll. We were in demand. We did something for Al Di Meola as well. We were
I,
kind of considered hip at the time. For a very brief moment, Andy, I've been hip.
well, I interviewed Al Di Meola, and I was determined to ask him about the Casino album that you did,
Oh,
and
really,
he
really?
went, he spoke because about that album, which I think again, what Al Di Meola was doing on that album was quite forward thinking, and getting Jan Hammer in and getting him to sort of mess around with a Fairlight sampler
Yeah,
really
yeah,
really
true.
laid the groundwork for the sound of the whole 1980s in a way, and
Well, there you
also
go.
I can hear echoes of what you were doing in Crimson as well,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
the Beat album. There's ideas on there that I can hear appearing on the Casino album. but
yeah,
the,
I think so.
but the thing we claimed about Mercury is you're playing such a strong melodic
Yeah.
part of that album. How did that
Hmm.
come about? And
Well, because it was the equipment was there to be able to do that. There was a thing called MIDI that had just been
yeah.
invented, so you could assign a pitch to your four drums. So if you had four nice notes for your four drums,
Mm,
you have the bass drum have the lowest one and
mm,
the snare drum the middle one and so forth. And you could fool around with those. There's a song called Previous Man, I believe, that
mm.
has a sort of drum solo on it that I'm really proud of. It's terrific. It's just
It's
me
amazing.
toying with pitched drums, if you like. Who says drums can't play tunes?
I know. And when I heard it, I thought, my God, this is the future of drumming. And then no one ever did it again. It's like, why is it, why did it never happen? It's as though the instrumentalists but they were more, the 1980s seems like that for me in terms of sound, on what you expect the instrument to sound like. The great instrumentalists of that period are so much more exciting than the sort of conformity we have nowadays,
Well, I think
where
so. Yeah, I think so. When I first came across electronic drums, the marketing line was electronic drums have arrived, drummers, throw away your acoustic set. This is the future. You're never going to need another acoustic set. These sound better than acoustics. They don't.
yeah,
They don't sound anything like acoustic
yeah,
sets at all. However, they can do MIDI for you. And they can do other things. And you can pitch them up and you can play King Crimson's Waiting Man on them.
yeah.
You can do all kinds of things, but it's never a drum set. It's going to sound like a drum set. Never. It's a drum set's in a different thing, like Steinway and Fender Rhodes.
I had a Simmons kit, and I can remember you could if you midid it straight into a keyboard, you got the whole tone scale.
Oh, all
Because
right, okay.
they did, and so I used to be in this improvising group, and we'd have to play this whole tone scale because I didn't have one of those MIDI routers that you had where you could get it to change.
Yes,
So
eventually.
I had to be stuck with whatever that was there. But I always felt they played very nicely because they were so undrum like. It was like I used to think, well, if I play a cowbell, I don't want it to feel like a snare drum. It feels
All
like a
right, okay.
cowbell.
Yeah,
Simmons pad feels like a Simmons pad, and I was quite
yeah.
happy with that. And I lost them, and I got into a lot of electronic drums later on, but I felt the Simmons had a sort of uniqueness to it that was
It
quite,
did. It did. Dave Simmons himself was a very
yeah.
unique kind of British guy, a complete British kind of thing to it, certainly. But young drummers these days, and I can't give you names really, are
Mm,
now very adept at hybrid drum kits that are half electronic and half acoustic, and they can manipulate
mm,
between the two very well.
yeah.
Float in between all electric, all electronic, all acoustic, or a sort of gravy between the two. And I think I'm most impressed by that. I think it's fantastic.
Um, Around this time, because it seems like we're doing a sort of travel through your. I didn't plan to do this sort of travel through your
Well, well,
career.
well we haven't got long to go if we're going to do the
Yeah.
whole career. So,
Well, let's not do that then, and get on to the second line of questioning. Is you
yeah,
quite famously stopped, like Greta Garbo? You said, "I want to be alone."
I did. I did. I said exactly that, and I was quite happy to do that. I think it's I'm very surprised more people don't do the
Yeah.
same thing. I mean, I defy anybody who's been doing the same thing for 40 or 45 years or something to not wish to do something else. And all I wanted to do was something else. Um, and eventually became essential that I did because I was not enjoying music. I was not enjoying what I was playing or hearing myself play, and I wasn't enjoying life really. And when you get three signals like that, you should change. You don't have to go very far. So I stayed close to music. I went and studied a bit and find out what people do in music and what people think music is and what they think creativity might be. And I interviewed a group of expert drummers to ask them about what. So this was, academic research on the topic of creativity. So I was away from the drum set for about 13 years, I think, all in all, which is a long time, really a long time. And stupidly, I should have said to some cognitive specialist, some guy who's good at neuroscience, I'm going to stop drumming now, cold turkey. I'm going to stop. There's been motor functions that I've been working on, quite fine motor functions for 45 years or so. I'm going to stop dead now, and I'm going to start again in 13 years' time. And you can measure what
Yeah.
what I've
Yeah.
forgotten, what I can do, what I can't do.
I'll do. Yeah.
And that would have been an interesting piece of research for somebody who's a specialist in that field. Um,
When
but
you
I enjoyed it. I enjoy writing. I enjoy talking, lecturing, and so forth.
Well, I feel I should ask you what was it like to come back and how did you get your chops back? But I've got to be honest, we met in 2005 at Drumfest. I was playing Drumfest. I was first on the bill, and we met backstage and we had a chat. And you said you were interested in cognitive science and philosophy and creativity. And then we met again at another drum show. We had to do a signing session together. You won't remember this because I know what it's like when I don't remember people. But of course, me meeting you, I remember. But you were talking to me about this then and talking about the philosophy of creativity. I have become very interested in that. So, what is, why do you think we do it? And what's its purpose? Is it merely entertainment or does it have
Oh, I think it's a bit more than entertainment.
Yeah, so if it's more than entertainment, what is it?
What is what? What is creativity?
So yeah,
What is music?
creativity,
What is music
yeah,
performance?
art,
Um,
music, creativity. Why is it important and why do we do it?
well, it's different for different people. I think like many people, I do it to make sense of the world, to make sense of, to learn more about me, if you like, to make sense of what it is that I'm doing in the world, to hear what it is that I'm doing. And the great thing about music is it's a bit like a mirror. You can hold your face up to a mirror and you can say, "Oh, that's what I look like." Oh God, I don't really like that bit, and I don't like the curly bit there, and I hate this bit here, but I can change. I can change. You can change through music. So if you ask me, music is a vehicle for change.
Oh, you know what? You know I
Why?
was
Are you all right? Do you feel
yeah,
okay?
I
What's happened? You
I
went,
was I was a bit of a Gurdjieffian.
oh, were
Not
you?
not not anymore. But I was influenced by that way of thinking. I was interested in how we can change because I think that's the big question when we boil it down. And
Yeah.
the idea that art is a vehicle to help you, not help you, it is the vehicle by which we change, or
Yes.
music, is a very interesting idea for me because there, if you're a good Jeffian, he focuses on the reasons why we cannot change and this sort of robot state that we exist in.
All right. Okay. I don't.
But there is it's really funny. When Soft Machine came to my studio, I got up very arrogantly, said, "Can I have a jam with you?" And they went, "Okay, then." And so Asaf Circus, who's the drummer, I just went and sat next to him, and we both played the drums together. And as soon as we got into it, I could tell that I actually provided a little bit of extra for the band. It was like, whoa! And then
Oh, great.
suddenly we're in this. It's almost like a super consciousness. It's like you wake up when you play music. Do you think that has something to do with it? There's a focus on something which is very difficult. I would call it the sublime. That we focus on something which wakes us up to who we are, perhaps.
It's in there somewhere. I mean, it might do that for you. We're talking about music performance because we're both
Yeah, performance.
performers,
Yeah,
and that's my interest is performance. It's not so much creating it. Well, it's creating it with others in a particular space, a
yeah,
particular
yeah.
time. And it's the with others bit that's very
With
important.
others, with it doesn't work on your own so much, is
It
it?
doesn't quite, does it? Which is the sort of downfall, I think, not a downfall, it's the Achilles heel, if you like, of YouTube drummers, the guys, who do wonderful things on YouTube. And we're all expected to kind of admire this fantastic, blinding five-stroke roll or something,
Mm.
all of which is great, but it doesn't necessarily work very well with other people. And I think if I've been able to work at all, it's because people not only trust me as a band leader, in other words, I pay what I'll say
Mm.
I'll pay,
Yeah, yeah.
but that what they want to do, I can probably accommodate, and I like that and make something of it. So I think my best work environment is working with 4 or 5 open-minded people, and I've had the privilege of doing that. It's a cliche I say, but I'm one of the few people I know who's more or less made the music he wants with the people he wants, where and when he wants, and how much luckier can any man get than that, which is really nice.
I I've been having thoughts recently that when you look at the history of music from the beginning of time, music is entirely about performing. It's entirely about being involved, whether you're singing hymns in a church, whether you're down a tavern singing folk songs, or even if you are not joining in, your involvement is different. Maybe people would go around a piano and play songs that they'd
Yes.
got from the musical. So the vast majority of time, if you were hearing music, it was either someone directly near you's playing it, or you are involved in it yourself. Then the 20th century comes along and they monetize recording, and suddenly there's like a Mount Olympus, us and them, and all of us
Yeah,
musicians.
the specialist
Yeah,
musician. Yeah,
yeah, and we're
sure.
we and you're supposed to be the audience, and then a few
Well,
hallowed people like yourself can occupy Mount Olympus only for a short time, but you occupy Mount Olympus, and we all look up.
sure,
And I
sure.
wonder whether the collapse of the industry may well return to a much more performance-based
Well, we've
approach
noticed
to
this.
music again.
We've noticed this in the band I'm in, Pete Roth Trio.
Yeah,
We've noticed there's an uptick in appreciation of people who come to the gigs for live performance, a demand for it, a thirst for it, a deep appreciation of it, and then people are very grateful. They love to see 3 guys. We're only a tiny little trio, 3 guys deeply involved in creating something then there on the spot in the moment that won't be the same the following night somewhere else. It'll be different. Um, and I was rather pleased with a comment from one person who said, well, I've just come to 2 of your shows, one on Monday, one on Friday. I picked up the set list on both, and it's the same set list, but the music sounded completely different. And I
I
rather like that. I thought that's great, terrific.
and I think there's no thought of an album. You don't need any of these things, and yet I've watched you play because the internet allows this thing to move in a way that
Yeah.
people know about the gigs. I really think that what you're doing is very, very exciting. And I think the fact that you got out at that point where, because I was playing progressive rock in a band called IQ, and I was in a band called Frost at that time.
Mm.
And our guy that was running in 2008, which I think is when you got out, I can remember ringing him up and he said, "There's no point in doing this anymore." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we're just getting killed by torrent files. We've just spent 20,000 quid on an album and it's just getting
Oh,
downloaded." And he
oh,
said all
yeah.
this, and at that point, you sort of disappear. And now the industry is well and truly dead. You reappear in this much more uh, communal
It
form.
is. It is community communal. Absolutely. Invent it now on the spur of the moment. Please make it different. Please make it undownloadable.
Yeah, yeah,
We discourage people, off from the stage, we discourage people from videoing it and uploading, a shitty picture of the back of
yeah.
somebody's head with me wailing away on the other side of it because we would rather they enjoyed, and
Being
listened,
there in the moment. Yeah.
being there in the moment. Absolutely. Like we are. That's what we've come for. So, we go down that road and like it a lot. And we've known a bit of an uptick, and since AI arrives and everybody now doubts everything, how can you doubt the fact that me, Mike, and Pete are standing there playing this stuff? We hope to the best of our ability. There's nothing false about that at all.
I was talking to a session player, really big session player, and he said we're all panicking. He said that it's the last nail in the coffin. He goes, "There's no work because if they want a conga player or they want a harpist, all the sort of people that still could work because they played some weird."
Yeah.
Said they've all gone because they just go to AI now. Um, I think that you are still in the pointy end. I think you're doing the right thing. I think it's very
Well,
exciting because
I think there's something in that, yes. Not easy to do, I have to say. The circumstances are not easy. Why? Because there's no money in it. Secondly, short haul air travel to Europe is a nightmare, as you may have
yeah,
heard in the
yeah.
news the other day.
Mm.
Um, and people, participants almost need another income to live. So it's just a charitable operation, one could say, but we love doing it and we can afford to do it, so we'll do it.
Well, I started off in my garage talking about the albums I like, and now I've got a nice big studio with a lovely mixing desk in,
Wow. Cool.
and I started inviting my friends down. They come down, we play. I stick it on the internet, and it is nicely recorded, and it does sound good. But also, I keep it really fresh. And the soft machine guys, they watch my channel, and that's why they came down. And I think it's
Hmm.
going to do them a lot of good. So the invitation is over, is there. If you are around in the Midlands and you want to come over and play over at
Well,
my studio, and
that's very kind, Andy.
I promise you, it will be an interesting experience in terms of the thing that the internet and YouTube and the stuff that I'm involved in now.
Yeah.
What it can do is present reality if you do it right. And AI can never um, be the actual experience of doing it and being in it.
Yeah,
You see what I mean? So,
I do. I
and
do.
I think people need to change their view of what the outcome is artistically, because I think there is a way of presenting
Yes.
it. There are ways of musicians coming together online and the quality being there and the sound being there and also the vibe, the soft machine would go, this is the best sound we've had on our tour. And I got
Oh,
about
really?
5 people in there and they were just,
Hmm.
so they had a bit of an audience and they were, but there was
Lovely.
a lot of banter going on, a lot
Yeah,
of
great.
banter. And
Yeah.
so you felt like you were in an event, a little event, and I managed to
Yeah.
video it. So
We're,
that's where I think it needs to go.
we're just about to put out a live album. So we've recorded lots of dates, of course, which is
Yeah.
really nice from all around Europe and Japan and places. And we're just putting out a live album of that. And there it is. It's all very warts and all. It's unmanicured. Tweaked, about
Yeah.
2%. But it's sometimes ugly, sometimes great, sometimes and sometimes the
That's
best
what
bits is when you create music that you could never have written or you would never have written, which is
and
nice.
I and that often requires there needs to be a little bit of
Grit.
yeah, grit or chaos in the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah, sure. It's the grit in the pearl, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's the lark's tongues in the aspic.
that's exactly it. And I feel that you have done that your whole career. I feel that you're still doing it. I hope when the live album comes out that you'll get in touch and I will push it as much as I can here
You're
because
very sweet.
I believe that you are doing something. I'm not just here to get views. I'm trying to get across this idea that we need to go back to being human again. Jamming with each other, not worrying about being the best in the world, not trying to
Yeah,
join the music Olympics, and allowing us to be ourselves, as you said, to find out who we are through doing
that, wor-
something that's the load of
that,
fun.
that works for me. That's my current game plan. You've named it right there.
Thank you, Mr. Bruford. I think
Hey,
I've I typed, you've given me 10 minutes extra, which I thank you for very much. I hope was
pleasure.
it
Comes free of charge.
oh lovely. Was it interesting conversation? Did you feel
It was a very interesting conversation. Yeah.
that
Very interesting.
different questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
Lovely.
and so what do you think of John Anderson?
Are we still
we
running?
no we well, I always have to have a little bit of a joke. This is what is wrong at the moment, everybody. You don't want to hear this nonsense. You want to hear some bloody stuff
Yeah, I
about
know.
beauty and truth and all that type of stuff. So anyway,
He's a lovely
I,
bloke.
I know I've interviewed him. He was a lovely man.
Great,
Right, I'm
great.
going to switch off then. How do I
All
do
right.
that?
See you,
Thank
Andy.
you.
Cheers then.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.